So, welcome to our series on comparing unity teachings with other works, with other religious belief systems and organizations. I'm not going to do every one, and in fact, this is the last one I'm going to do for a while, because I'm doing the ones that were specifically asked for by some of you. So today is Unity and Christian Science. There's been so much parallel activity between these two teachings, and people who have been Christian Scientists find themselves very comfortable in unity, and vice versa. I was at an event at the college recently, and in fact, Gary, you were there. We had a Christian Science representative and a unity representative, and we both agreed that the teachings, the theology, the ideation of the two groups is identical. Why? Because we came from the same roots. So that's the story I'm going to tell you today. So Christian Science was founded by Mary Baker Eddy. How many of you have heard that name before? Great. No one under 40 has heard that name, I find, that as I ask around. But we all know it. And she was born in 1821. So, what I discovered in my research was Mary Baker Eddy had a tragic life. She had an extremely painful first 20 years of her life. She had an extremely brutal father. I don't know if it would be called abuse, but emotionally abusive, to the point where she would be so frustrated that she would fall on the ground in fits of hysteria and be unable to recover for several days. They would have to send for a doctor. That's how upset she got. And it was described as a contentious relationship with her father. Her mother was very mellow and kind, but then, Mary Baker married at 20 and moved away. And the man that she married died within 6 months of cholera. And she was pregnant. She returned to her family, and she became the mother of this child. And her mother died then. They said that in 1 year she had 4 deaths that devastated her when she was 20. The brother she was closest to died, her husband died, her mother died, and then she got engaged and her fiancé died in 1 year. And so then the child grew to be 3 or 4, and her father remarried. And the woman that he married would not accept the child into their household. And Mary didn't have any way to make a living in those days, and the child was sent off to live with someone else. Actually, their family nursemaid or something who had a nice income. So the child was sent off when it was 4 years old to live elsewhere, and then that family moved to Montana, and the child was told that his mother had died, and she was told that the child was lost to her. And she spent many years looking for that child. She writes in her autobiography, I have used every means possible to track down my child, and nothing has worked. But finally, at the age of 36, he found her. He was married and had 2 children. But to lose a child at 4 until he's 36 is heart-wrenching, is it not? So also she had digestive problems as a child. Surprise, surprise. And so she put herself on a very strict diet of bread and water and vegetables only, 1 meal a day, and what kind of mania that was. But anyway, she was undernourished all throughout her youth. She was a very slender, slight woman with very delicate health. And so she met up with Phineas Quimby in Massachusetts. And he was one of the very first people who used hypnotism. Now, I didn't find it in any of the online sources, but one of our classes in ministerial school was taught to show us what Quimby actually did in his early days of healing practice. He would hypnotize the patient, the client, and then tell them that Jesus was sitting across from them in a chair. Jesus Christ, was right there, and that Jesus healed them, and they would be healed. And that was the method that Parkhurst used of how he employed hypnotism. And so I'm sure there are many more details that could be known, but for today, suffice it to say that Mary Baker at that time, Eddie is the name of her third husband. She had 4 husbands altogether. All of them died within a few years. She partnered with him, and the two of them brainstormed together and developed teachings and writings and approaches and understandings of healing that were simply mental attitude treatments. I don't mean to say simply. They were working at the level of mind healing. Now this was a really new this was new information in the 19th century. And it actually was the beginning of what we now call New Thought. So I want to read you just this one passage that's from, maybe you've heard of the Varieties of Religious Experience by William James. This was the definitive book that was published in the 1800s, written by William James, who was a psychologist. He was the brother of Henry James, who wrote great American novels. And in his book called Varieties of Religious Experience, he describes the New Thought movement. And it's just so articulate the way he says it. I just love it. He says, "For the sake of having a brief designation, I will give the title of the Mind Cure Movement to this New Thought. There are various sects of this New Thought, to use another of the names by which it calls itself, but their agreements are so profound that their differences may be neglected for my present purpose, and I will treat the movement without apology as if it were a simple thing. It is an optimistic scheme of life, with both a speculative and a practical side. In its gradual development during the last quarter of a century, it has taken up into itself a number of contributory movements, and it must now be reckoned with as a genuine religious power." And by the way, Christian Science was invited to the Parliament of Religions at the end of the 1800s. It has reached the stage, for example, when the demand for its literature is great enough for publishers to supply the demand, a phenomenon never observed, I imagine, until a religion had got well past its earliest insecure beginning. In other words, within 30 years, they had publishers publishing the books that they wrote, and there was a market for it. One of the sources of mind cure is the 4 Gospels. Another is Transcendentalism, the Emersonian people. Another is Berkeleyan idealism, and that's a branch of philosophy that says the ideals behind the manifestation are the perfect idea. Another is Spiritism, which means there's a spirit that's inherent in everything we see. Another is the optimistic popular science evolutionism. And finally, Hinduism has contributed a strain. But the most characteristic feature of the mind cure movement is an inspiration much more direct. The leaders in this faith have had an intuitive belief in the all-saving power of the healthy-minded attitudes as such, in the conquering of and the efficacy of courage, hope, and trust, and a correlative and a contempt for doubt, fear, worry, and all the nervously precautionary states of mind. Their belief has, in a general way, been corroborated by the practical experience of their disciples, and this experience forms today a mass imposing in its amount of people. So this grew in the early days of the United States particularly. It didn't really go worldwide that much. It was a new world phenomenon. And there were many people that were students and writers and influenced by these teachings. Now, I went on Wikipedia. They have an article on New Thought, and they have a list of people who are New Thought writers and representatives of it, which, includes unity. And I want to read you the names that just I recognize, and I think many of you do, because in our journey looking for truth and finally arriving somewhere, whether it's unity or divine science or wherever it is for you, you come across a lot of different spiritual teachers that inspire you. And so here's a collection of all of them. So Annie Ricks Millets, have you heard of her? She was an early writer for Unity. Okay. Then Nona Brooks, the founder of Divine Science. Emily Cady, she's our writer. Dale Carnegie is considered New Thought. Melinda Kramer, who founded Religious Science. Horatio Dresser and the Dresser family, have you heard of them? Then Henry Drummond, who wrote, what did he write? Love, the Supreme Gift. Mary Baker Eddy. Warren Felt Evans, heard of him? Then they have Charles Fillmore, Myrtle Fillmore. They have Napoleon Hill, Emmett Fox, Ernest Holmes. Ernest Holmes, founder of Science of Mind. Emma Curtis Hopkins, I've spoken of her so often. I really want you to know that name, because she was the one who founded the School of Metaphysics that taught everybody except Mary Baker Eddy. Emma Curtis Hopkins. Phineas Parkhurst Quimby, the hypnotist. Ralph Waldo Trine, I recognize that name, but I don't know what he did. Ella Wheeler Wilcox, you'll see her name on lots of the words of our hymns. She wrote a lot of poems that were published in those early publications. And now in the modern times, the names, they put Michael Beckwith. He's a religious science minister, but he partners with Unity a lot. He's got the Agape Center in Los Angeles. Terry Cole Whitaker. Have you heard of her? People have mentioned her to me. Wayne Dyer. Matthew Fox, the theologian who is an excommunicated Catholic priest. James Dillett Freeman, our poet laureate. And Joel Goldsmith. Are you familiar with him? He came through Christian Science, but he established his own work. He has wonderful books on healing, and he was a very powerful healer. Louise Hay. Louise Hay, we all love her. Esther and Jerry Hicks. Many of you follow them. People tell me about them all the time. Jean Houston. I love her. I didn't realize she was considered New Thought, New Age. But Byron Katie, Carolyn Mace, Catherine Ponder, our writer who wrote The Dynamic Laws of Prosperity. Della Reese, who started that show, Touched by an Angel. She was ordained by Johnny Coleman. Florence Scovel Shinn, we use her ideas in our attitudinal healing class. Eckhart Tolle. Boy, how many of you have listened to any video recently for Eckhart Tolle? It's always coming in on my feed. I love how he talks, his voice and his accent. Iyanla Vanzant, and she was on the cover of Unity magazine, really. Neil Donald Walsh, who wrote Conversations with God, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then last they have Gary Zukov, who wrote the book, The Seat of the Soul. All these new spirituality, new thought, new paradigm thinkers. It's wonderful. It's wonderful what we're going through today. But back to Christian Science. So, Mary Baker Eddy published Science and Health, the foundational book for Christian Science, in 1875. And out of that, really, New Thought emerges. And between us and the Christian Science, we have the same teachings, but a different culture around it. And that's what I'm going to share with you today, how our culture as a group, as a spiritual movement, our cultures are very different. So now why Christian Science is so widely known is because it made the news because people were refusing medical treatment. They were refusing medicine. They were refusing surgery. They were refusing it, saying that God heals them and not these other things. So that made the news a lot. And there were huge numbers of people flocking to Christian Science. They have huge temples all over the United States because it was such a simple and appealing choice to say, no, I'm not going to go that way. God is going to heal me. And for many people, it did work. But in Unity, we don't say that you can't have medical treatment. We say that God can heal you through any means and all means. And there is nothing that God cannot do, and there is no treatment that God cannot move through. Many people in this New Thought movement wanted to use the term Christian Science because they thought of it as a generic designation for this way of thinking. It's using Christianity or the teachings of Jesus in a scientific way to think of the physical body as an illusion, and the only reality is eternal life. To them, that was a science. And but Mary Baker Eddy copyrighted the name. So then, after a certain point in time, no one could use it but the Christian Science Church itself. So, having gone to a Christian Science church myself, I was astonished to see how they're organized. They don't have ordained ministers, and they don't have sermons, and what they do have is a scheduled reading of the Science and Health text that is scheduled for a rotation in perpetuity for the rest of time. And the same way with a Bible reading. There's a scheduled rotating Bible text that is designated to be read every Sunday. It is designated in the organizational bylaws that nothing can be changed of these texts or of this schedule. The only choice that can be made at a Sunday gathering is what song people will sing. And I think, it's not surprising to see that the organization, the Christian Science movement, is not thriving. It's shrinking. They're selling their buildings. It's getting smaller and smaller, and there's no space for spontaneity or originality or creativity. It's not a community of creative activity and expanding thought. It's just not. Even though our teachings are the same, our belief system is the same. Our notion of what God is and what humans are and what spirit is come from the same source, but we have a completely different way of creating community around that. So I would say that we see Unity and we see Christian Science as tips of the iceberg, but the iceberg is the same. It's the same iceberg. And they are not the only tips of an iceberg. There are many others. And the more that we recognize our common roots, I think the more commonality and growth we can share. But the Centers for Spiritual Living and Unity Worldwide Ministries, every now and then they talk about combining the two movements. They haven't come to an agreement on that yet. But just think, these tips of the iceberg: Unity, Christian Science, Divine Science, Science of Mind. From the same iceberg, they're like the mustard seed, The mustard seed that is the tiniest of seeds, but it grows to encompass huge areas. It expands into a huge growth. And I want to say, this is only the beginning. Know this and be blessed by it. Amen. Our statement for meditation is found in your program folder. How great is thy power, O my soul. And so let's prepare now to drink deeply of these living waters of spirit. To turn our attention within to the light that shines eternally. We breathe deeply, breathing in the breath of God. We allow the thoughts of the intellect to drain away like sparkles into a flow, washed away. Our bodies we honor as the sacred temple of the living God. Our beautiful garments, we love them, we bless them, we infuse them with divine life activity. All fatigue and discomfort is thrust away, and we are in bliss, in comfort, and in peace. And so let us vocalize our statement, which is, I'll say it first. How great is thy power, O my soul. Together, how great is thy power, O my soul. And silently within, we feel and know that we are individualized expressions of God. The soul that we carry is created in the living likeness of God. And in this assurance, we now rest in the silence. Be still and know that I am God. These mysteries we behold. Amen.